people have become dissatisfied with the sterile, dry, and frankly meaningless answers to the great mysteries of life that are given by science and by history. More and more people, and I would say it runs into tens and perhaps even hundreds of millions around the world, are increasingly aware that we're a much more mysterious species than we give ourselves credit for.
About this stuff, reading other people's accounts. What I tell people, set all that aside. You can learn how to make contact with these visitors yourself. And when you do, if you have this discernment, you can discern the difference between an ARV and a PLF and a real ET craft and an ET being. And you're in this state of consciousness, it'll be so clear what the difference is. It's like night and day. There's no comparison. You're going to be able to see that these visitors who have been coming here for thousands of years, by the way, they have no malice towards Earth and her people. However, they're very concerned about the hostility humans have, and that as Neil Armstrong, who landed on the moon, my uncle designed the lunar module that took Neil Armstrong to the moon, and my uncle was the senior project engineer for that at Grumman. It was now Northrop Grumman, but that built the lunar module. And when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon the first time, and the first man on the moon, the crater around where we landed was crowded with these extraterrestrial vehicles. I have multiple witnesses to this. And Neil Armstrong told a member of our team that, yes, but we were warned off the moon. Why? Because we were going there as part of the arms race with the Soviet Union. We didn't go to the moon. The Apollo program was a highly militarized, competitive program where we weren't going out to the moon, or our plans to go to Mars were not as sort of a unified, peaceful world civilization. It was part of the military-industrial complex competition and a proxy for the Cold War. And that is the truth about the Apollo program. Everyone knows it. So I think that the ETs have made it very clear, the real ETs, that the entry ticket to being interplanetary ourselves is to begin to be civilized.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Clifford Stone. I was a Sergeant First Class, United States Army. I had a secret clearance with nuclear surety. I could get the clearance that I needed to do whatever it was that was necessary for me to do at the time on special operations when I was called in on those. What I'm referring to here is that I was involved in situations where we actually did recoveries of crashed saucers, for lack of a better term, debris thereof. There were bodies that were involved with some of these crashes, also some were alive. While we were doing all this, we were telling the American public there was nothing to it. We were telling the world there was nothing to it. I'd like to go into detail on some of the cases about the nuts and bolts cases right here, but I will be available if you have any questions concerning my involvement in this. You can talk to Dr. Greer to arrange for me to get to talk to you. But the whole situation is, we've told the American people that there's no such thing as UFOs. I've been involved where we have recovered these objects. We know them to be of extraterrestrials. In 1969, I had an event that happened to me while I was stationed at Fort Lee, Virginia. We went to Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania. That would be my first exposure to any time that we would be recovering an unidentified flying object. When we went there, we already had people that was already in the facility. We were a backup team, which was supposed to be NBC because there was supposed to be some nuclear materials that was on board this craft. Later on, most people involved were to be told that there was nothing on board it. It was nothing more than just a crash of one of our aircraft. I know better because I was one of the people that approached it with a Geiger counter to get surface readings. I was the first person to go ahead and see that there were bodies on it. That would be the first of approximately 12 events. UFO crashes are not events that take place every day. They're rare. I know we're not alone in the universe. I know that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. It's evidence that's been denied to the American people. I stand before you today, my almighty God, and I tell you this. If Congress calls me in and says, will you testify in detail what you know, I stand here today prepared and ready to do just that. Governments must never lie to the people for no reason. Thank you. A time frame as it reflected to them that it was 30, 40 years ago that this records was destroyed, and at this late date it would be almost impossible to determine who ordered their destruction. However, at the same time, the United States Army was releasing records on UFOs. For the last half a century, the Army has been stating they did not have any records. It was found that the Army did have records, to wit, Army Counterintelligence Corps records dealt with UFOs. They have thus far to date released 339 records. There is a record in there, and it's very interesting, and it's this document, and it is this document right here. It stipulates, remembering that this is a document that was released dealing with UFOs. It is part of the Counterintelligence Corps files pertaining to UFOs. You will note projects, U.S. Air Force Detachment 35. U.S. Air Force Detachment 35 was a highly sensitive intelligence unit at the time. This lists names of cities here in the U.S. that had some dealing with UFOs. You can find, as a matter of fact, some of these incidences referred to in the early histories of Project Sign, which was the forerunner of Project Blue Book. You will note right up here, circled Roswell. This is a UFO file, or this is from the UFO files of the Counterintelligence Corps, United States Army. You will note the authorization for the declassification is based on an order signed into law by President Clinton, to wit, Executive Order 12958. You will further note that originating agency interests fully declassified, yes. You will note down below that it states other agencies' interests declassified. You will note it's circled no. Clearly this is an Army document. Clearly this document reflects that these were projects that were turned over to the United States Air Force from Army files. Reason for that, prior to September 1947, the Army and the Air Force were the same. We find out that there was a concern about the existence of these documents, or these objects, as to what their purpose was and what their origin was. This came home on February 26, 1942. Commonly called the Battle of Los Angeles. We find that there are some 15 to 20 unidentified craft flying over Los Angeles. We immediately responded by trying to shoot these objects down. The 37th Coastal Artillery Group expanded 1,430 rounds without bringing anything down. We immediately set out to try to find out if there was some hidden base belonging to the Axis from where these planes could come, some commercial airport that they could have these aircraft housed. None of this bore out. Every Pacific theater, they were experiencing the same phenomena, the so-called Foo Fighters. MacArthur directed his intelligence people to find out what was going on. I have reason to believe that in 1943, MacArthur found out that in fact we had things not of this earth, that we had visitors from some other planet visiting our planet here that was actually observing that world event that we call the Second World War. One of the problems that he had was that should this be the case, and should they prove to be hostile, we knew very little about them, and we had very little means in which to defend ourselves. MacArthur organized what was called the Interplanetary Phenomena Research Unit. It would later be taken over by General Marshall, and it continued all the way through present day. Names have been changed, records still haven't surfaced. The Army tries to state that it was not an official organization effort to try to investigate UFOs, but it was organized by a general. It bore fruit. It came to conclusions that was not popular, i.e. interplanetary spacecraft. And they continued to do exactly what they do today, and that is to be part of a multi-intelligent operation in the recovery of objects of unknown origin, particularly those that are of non-earthly origin, and to assess that information, get raw field intelligence data, and process that data into some type of useful intelligence product to disseminate to the field to those people who have a need to know, and those people that are the, shall we say, the keepers of that information. I believe that there was something that was discovered in China in 1943. Exactly what that something is, I have no idea what that was. But one of his Air Force generals, Army Air Corps generals at the time, came back to MacArthur. I have reason to believe that in 1943, MacArthur found out that in fact we had things not of this earth, that we had visitors from some other planet visiting our planet here that was actually observing that world event that we call the Second World War. One of the problems that he had was that should this be the case, and should they prove to be hostile, we knew very little about them, and we had very little means in which to defend ourselves. MacArthur organized what was called the Interplanetary Phenomena Research Unit. It would later be taken over by General Marshall, and it continued all the way through present day. Names have been changed, records still have surfaced. The Army tries to state that it was not an official organization effort to try to investigate UFOs, but it was organized by a general. It bore fruit. It came to conclusions that was not popular, i.e. interplanetary spacecraft. And they continued to do exactly what they do today, and that is to be part of a multi-intelligent operation in the recovery of objects of unknown origin, particularly those that are of non-earthly origin, and to assess that information, get raw field intelligence data, and process that data into some type of useful intelligence product to disseminate to the field to those people who have a need to know, and those people that are the, shall we say, the keepers of that information. I believe that there was something that was discovered in China in 1943. Exactly what that something is, I have no idea what that was. But one of his Air Force generals, Army Air Corps generals at the time, came back to MacArthur, told MacArthur, what we have is something not of this earth. I would further suggest that by this time, even the Germans had uncovered evidence that we were being visited and had some type of physical evidence. MacArthur definitely had physical evidence. From the documentation I saw, I was not able to ascertain exactly what that physical evidence consisted of, but it was there. The one thing I find quite unique is that the Germans may have tried to back engineer it. We definitely probably tried to back engineer it. But we find that your technology has to be on par with the acquired technology in order to back engineer. We very quickly were able to ascertain within 3 to 4 years after the end of the war that our visitors were anywhere from 1 to 2 billion years ahead of us. In the 1950s, the United States Air Force had an elite unit to investigate UFOs outside of Blue Book, even though Blue Book thought that unit was working with them, they were not. This unit was initially organized as the 4602nd Air Intelligence Service Squadron. Among its peacetime missions was Operation Blue Fly. Operation Blue Fly was to recover objects of unknown origin that fell to Earth. Very important that you remember objects that fell to Earth, because we didn't have any spacecraft up there at this time. As a result of this, they had monitors right there at Wright-Patterson that when UFO reports came in, they were looked at very closely to see if there was any possible means of, or any possible necessity of sending out teams to recover any of this fallen debris. The Air Force states they never used them. I'm telling you they did. But the intent of Operation Blue Fly, peacetime project, was to go out and recover objects of unknown origin that impacted with the Earth. Later it would be expanded in 1957 to cover all objects of unknown origin, meaning spacecraft too. It would be expanded to a much larger program encompassing other programs out there, and it would become part of what they would call the 1957 October timeframe, Project Moondust. Project Moondust is the overall field exploitation to recover only two items. That is, objects of non-U.S. origin that survives re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere and impacts with the Earth. Naturally, we would be interested in those items from a technical, scientific intelligence basis to determine or try to ascertain the technical capabilities of any potential enemy or known enemy of the U.S. at that time that was launching space vehicles into space. The other area of interest was objects of unknown origin. Now we find that there were quite a few objects of unknown origin that did not correlate with any known space launches or impact times of any known space debris falling back to Earth. We also find out that there was never a report filed by our government that we had recovered these objects and then notified the country. We would immediately ascertain the point of origin that we had recovered them, which would be required by international law. And we never ever went ahead and had a political protest filed against us. In short, under Moondust, under Blue Fly, we have recovered alien debris, not of the Earth. The degree of classification that we have now has changed over the years. Back during the time of the Second World War, all the way up to, say, 1969, you may have had as many as 11 classifications. Now there are 3: secret, or confidential, secret, and top secret. However, if you have information that is highly sensitive, that requires the protection above and beyond the norm of what is provided for those classifications, that's what you have special access programs. Simply because I made a promise not to. You do not have got to get that type of information, the documentation, out into public domain as it exists in the government files, unless it is officially signed. We have got to get it released before it ultimately comes up being destroyed. As soon as we open a door, and we're right there, we're about to bust open the door. Good case is the Blue Book file, or the Blue Fly and Moondust files. I had classified documents. The Air Force acknowledged. When I got members of Congress to help me, they were immediately destroyed, and I can prove this. Somewhere along the line, they may see that material and realize there's some very highly sensitive information that would have damning effect upon the national security of the United States should become compromised. It requires to be further protected to ensure that there is only a limited access to that information to a small number of people. So small you can put them on a list of paper or on a piece of paper and list them by name. Thus you have the special access programs. The controls that were supposed to be put on the special access programs are not there. When Congress did their review of the way we do, the way we protect documents and the way we go ahead and implement our secrecy programs, they found that you had special access programs within special access programs, that it was essentially impossible to keep control of them all. And I'm telling you right now, it is essentially impossible to keep control of them. When it comes to UFOs, the same criteria applies. The problem we have right now is that event, i.e. the ultimate contact, where there is no longer a question about the reality of other beings in the universe coming here, that event has not taken place. Therefore, but a small nucleus within the intelligence community, numbering less than 100, and I'd suggest less than 50, control all that information. It is not subject to congressional review, the information security oversight at all. There would be quite a few missions to describe, but simply put, yes, I was involved in those type of operations. A lot of people think that you're just in a unit waiting in the rafters, just waiting for the next UFO crash or landing where there's going to be debris. It doesn't work that way. You have a real life, you have a real job in the military. However, if you are in an area where an event takes place and you are one of these people that they can go ahead and call upon, in your field of expertise, and I can't tell you what that field of expertise of mine would be because I really don't know. But if you're in that location, if you're in that vicinity, you'd be one of them utilized. Now, in order to prepare me for this, very early on in my career, they sent me to NBC school at Fort McClellan, Alabama. It's a 3-week school. It's for unit NBC personnel. NBC meaning nuclear, biological, and chemical. And it would always be on the auspices. That's what I was involved in. Later on, it would change to be something even more so. But you would go ahead, use it just as though it was a nuclear accident. There are procedures already established. A nuclear or biological or chemical accident, a hazard material accident, and you would utilize it that way. If you could get in there and do the recoveries, if you go in and extract the debris that are there quietly behind the scenes and no one knows, you'd do it. If you needed an officially sanctioned deception program to come into play, such as a bogus news release, you could do this also. You have an airplane accident. We have standard procedures on how we handle that. Those same procedures are utilized when you do a recovery or extraction of a crashed spacecraft or debris thereof. And I have to stress debris simply because these are highly advanced technical machines. There were not that many crashes. They're followable. You know, it's like you're seeing it, but everything's being pulled from your mind. Pains you felt, you feel that, and it's like a buzz all going off on your head. He was reading my whole life. And I mean, you know, it's hard to describe what you really felt there. Your life up to that point in seconds. And I mean, you were feeling everything. Went ahead. I remember going down and grabbing a hold of my head like this and falling to the floor. Next thing I remember, I wake up and I'm back in Jack's office. And when I'm back in Jack's office, they told me nothing happened, that I'd been there the whole day, but I knew better. There is an interaction between entities and certain government agencies within the U.S. government. I will not go so far to state that they are giving us technologies to kill ourselves. They are not along that line. Their purposes of being here are for scientific purposes and for humanitarian purposes. Abductions, those abductions which I believe to be real, have nothing to do with the scary scenario abductions that people hit up with. There's a reason for it. We have been very foolish in how we have done certain things, and we have harmed ourselves. We now realize that we have harmed ourselves, and we are trying to take corrective action. And that right there is the one thing that they're checking on. There's been the biosphere that's been damaged. They're not coming here to repair that. They are coming here to see how we handle it. But a government can't be the one that shoulders all the responsibility and shoulders all the knowledge and all the understanding. The whole situation is that we have to work in unison as a people, a united people. Let's go ahead and start preparing ourselves to where we ultimately will take the giant step to where we're going to be visiting other planets out there in other solar systems. And we have to, once again, I'll use the word, grow spiritually as a group of people. The people representing mankind on planet Earth.
about the possibility of dark and negative influences at the spiritual level and positive and benign influences. And the human dilemma always is the dilemma to choose between the two. A friend of mine calls this world, this realm that we live in, a university of duality. And I think that's a rather interesting idea, because a lot of people object to the idea of duality and would like everything just to be one and all beautiful, it's all goodness, and whatever duality there is something that we're just projecting. But I'm not sure how much we would have to learn from a world like that. I think duality is actually a very useful teaching tool, and that without it, it's very difficult to make choices that define us. It is not all there is, but in this particular experience, in the experience of being a human in a human body in this physical realm, duality has very important lessons to teach us. And were it to be taken away, what choices would we have to make? And if we didn't make choices, how could we grow? How could we learn? How could we develop?
Are there not potential dangers, though, with such a viewpoint of duality, in the sense of the individual becomes the arbiter of what is good and what is bad? Now, again, has history not shown numerous people working in a direction that they perceive to be good that may be deemed by history to have been bad?
Sure, good point.
And furthermore, is there something which is perhaps slightly going against a number of mystical traditions, both Christian mysticism and what might be called agnostic mysticism, as well as more Eastern forms of spiritual thinking, of unity, that the good and the bad are always together, the black and the white are always together, night and day. There's this harmony of polarity as opposed to a battle of polarity.
Well, those are very interesting points. In ancient Egypt, the polarity, the duality, was represented by Horus and Set. So Horus, the forces of light, the sun, goodness, virtue; Set, chaos, disaster, misery, evil. And it's very interesting. I mean, really, if you want to inquire into spiritual matters, you can just go to the ancient Egyptians. They have a lot to teach us on that. And it's very interesting at Denver that there's a single figure with two heads, and those two heads are the heads of Horus and Set. And I think they're telling us something there. So yes, I mean, I don't disagree that there is an overarching oneness, but I still feel very strongly that remove the need to choose between different courses of action, and you remove a fundamental teaching tool. I mean, nobody knows what we're doing here on this earth, in this physical realm. There really is no. Science cannot claim to have the answer to that. Science may say, materialist, Western reductionist science tends to say that this is all just an accident, that there is absolutely no purpose to it whatsoever, that it's just random processes working through that led to the evolution of life, that there is no such thing as the spirit, that when we die we're dead, there is no conscious survival of death in any form. This is not me saying this is I'm trying to summarize the model of reductionist Western science, and that in a word, there is no purpose to it, no transcendent purpose whatsoever. It's just purely accidental. And science may be right about that, but it equally well could be completely wrong about that. And another possibility has to be considered, that there is such a thing as, quote unquote, the soul, that consciousness may be a fundamental force of the universe rather than an epiphenomenon of brain processes, that consciousness may be engaged in a gigantic universal project of growth and development, and that what we have here on this earth, in a physical incarnation, in a world with physical and material consequences, is an opportunity to learn, and to learn by the choices we make, and to be defined by the choices we make, and perhaps even to have the opportunity to come back and learn lessons again and again and again. After all, many wise ancient cultures say that. They say that we do reincarnate, we do come back again and again, that there's a project going on, there's a reason for that. And if that were the case, then I can see a tremendous value to duality and to the need to make these choices. And yes, it's true that what may be evil for one culture may be regarded as good by another culture. And the same action, for example, killing another person, might in one circumstance be regarded as incredibly evil and wicked, and might in another circumstance be regarded as actually a really good thing to do. I think most people wouldn't dispute that it would probably have been a good thing to kill Hitler, but it would still have involved killing another human being. So we get into very complicated moral inquiries and choices here, which is difficult actually to resolve. But I think it can be reduced to fairly simple level. Does the action that I am about to take transgress on the sovereignty of others? Does the action that I am about to take add even one iota to the misery in the world? Or does it reduce it? And I think if we ask ourselves those questions, then what is good and what is evil become a little clearer to find. But I think if we all examine our hearts, we do actually have some kind of compass on this, which we do know this isn't really the right thing to say, this isn't really the right thing to do. That voice is there.
World War or terrorism. Let's take the Third World War. It's not written in stone. It's just that it's a high probability unless we as human beings go right back to this core principle and take responsibility for our thoughts. Do we want to keep seeing the world in this way? Do we want to empower people who are going to lead us in these dead-end directions that only lead to destruction? Here's an unfortunate truth. Our country, the United States, in the past 60-some years, has launched over 200 unprovoked attacks against other people. The law of cause and effect tells us that sooner or later, that pendulum comes back, and comes back as a wrecking ball. The war against terrorism will not be won militarily. Not through aggression against people who had nothing to do with it, not through recruiting more terrorists by bombing innocent people. The way they recommend, and they say it's an age-old solution, that all countries on earth must contribute equally to a true peace combat force. This is a force of armed soldiers under true international law that are sent in to put down terrorism, insurrections, of wars and criminality and aggression. We could put down this type of terrorism in a very short order. Do we have the will and do we have the wisdom to do that?
Well, I've been on this road for nearly 25 years, and I've walked the path with an open mind. Not a naive mind, an open mind. A mind that says, I'm not going to reject something just because it sounds far out. I'm not going to reject something because it is at odds with my belief system. I am going to let the information that I come across be my guide on what I accept to be true and what I do not. And it's a blank sheet of paper. What goes on there justifies its place, but I'm not going to deny anything a place on that piece of paper just because it's different to the norms that humanity has been programmed to believe is real. And so I'll just put this story together in a simplest way I can in the time we have. And at the Wembley Arena, I'm going to be going into this and so much more in great detail. Okay, the first thing that I think we need to understand the world is, what is the world? You know, we're born into the world and we tend to accept the world as it is when we're born into it. So yeah, well, everyone knows that, mate. It's always been like that. Well, maybe it hasn't. And maybe you've always thought it's like that because that's the only information you've ever been given. Let's look at it. Where'd you get your information from, okay? You're born, yeah? You come out of the womb and you come into a family. Yeah. Now the family, your parents have been through the same system that you're about to go through. And overwhelmingly there are, hallelujah, exceptions. Overwhelmingly they will have accepted what the system told them was real about history, about life, about reality, about all of it. Now they're not being nasty people to you. And telling you something they believe not to be true just because they don't like you. they're going to tell you in your formative years what they have been, I would say, programmed to believe is real. So they're doing it because they think what they're saying is right because the system's told them it's right. You then go into school and you go through the smaller schools, the bigger schools, and then into college and university. And through all that time, at different levels, are academics, professors and teachers who've been through the same system and then some to get to that level in academia, and therefore they have taken on the same belief systems that the system has told them is real, be it science, be it academia, be it medicine, whatever. Now through your life, your young life, all those people, system software, are going to then tell you what is right, based on what they believe is right and what the curriculum has told them is right, and they have to follow the curriculum. If you accept that version of reality and you've got a good memory, you can be very good at passing exams, and the system will reward you then. It will say, oh, yes, here's a degree, and oh, Johnny's done ever so good at school. How has he done well at school? Well, he's told the system what it told him to believe, and he repeated it, and the system loves that. Yeah. What happens if you challenge the system? Well, the authority figure, the teacher, all the rest of it is jumping in straight away. You know, you conform in the education system because it's programming you and preparing you to conform for the rest of your adult life. So where I'm going with this initially is, where do we get these belief systems from that we then take on for the rest of our lives is real, and then anyone like me who challenges that, sometimes majorly challenges it, he's got to be mad or crazy or something. No. I've just not accepted the system's version of events. And by system, I mean religious version of events, I mean science version of events, all of it. I've let the blank sheet of paper be my guide on what I believe based on the information justifying itself there. And when you do that and you erase what the system's told you, and you don't let the system's version of events be a constant 24/7 censor for anything outside of it, then the world looks a very different place, and your mind can now move. It's no longer in the prison cell of conformity. It's moving, it's expanding, it's getting insights, it's seeing things it didn't see before. And I found it very interesting that in 1984, in George Orwell's book, he made the point about history. And to summarize, he was basically saying, if you control history, you control the present. Because if you can manipulate and distort and outright lie about where we've come from, what we call history, then you are going to give people a totally distorted view of where they are, because they're going to see where they are as the culmination of where we've come from. So hijacking history has been fundamentally important. You look at detailed evidence of the background, the Rockefellers and all these people hijacked the writing of history. So that blank sheet of paper I'm talking about also has history erased from it on the basis of the system's version of history is, and history has to earn its place on the paper by evidence, by credible evidence, not by the system's version of events that we have to follow. And understanding history is fundamental to understanding where we are and what's going on and what's really behind this global conspiracy.
It's all psychedelic chemicals, including all the shit that was created that nobody can figure out, what pyramids or all these other crazy structures. I think that you guys are dead on the money when you talk about ancient civilizations. You guys talk about like Graham Hancock type shit, that there was some super advanced civilization, but I don't think they got it from aliens. I think they got it from drugs. And I think the drugs are the aliens. And I think you take those drugs, you contact aliens. And I'm not bullshit.
No.
If you take DMT, bro, I think you're contacting aliens. I really fucking do. I felt raped mentally, but in the best way ever when I came back from that. Like someone just saw through me and sees me for this really insignificant like style of creature. You know, really like mundane and really easy to solve and figure out. Like it just exposed me. And exposed me to infinite wisdom that was impossible to grasp. It did it all in some sort of a language. I think that is the alien. I think the alien is psychedelic chemicals, and we know there's a great history of human use of psychedelic chemicals dating back thousands and thousands of years. Mushrooms drawn on cave walls, you know, all evidence of ritualistic use of cannabis that dates thousands and thousands of years BC. So if we know that they knew about all this shit, we know that they knew about the Icke mescaline shroom, and, you know, in the Amazon they've been doing ayahuasca for thousands and thousands of years. They don't even know how long because they don't even write it down. They just always have done it. That's the alien, bro. That's the alien. The alien is these compounds, and the aliens are real because these compounds allow you to get to this other place. They allow you to communicate with something, and that's why all these people are abducted in the middle of the night, man. They're abducted in the middle of the night because that's when your brain is producing DMT. That's when your brain is producing psychedelic chemicals. And when your brain produces those chemicals, it opens that gateway and you communicate with these things. We just want everything real to be. Someone said this, I think it was Terence McKenna, that people have a problem with something that's real that you can't hit with a hammer. Right. And I think that's a real way of putting it. It's a real issue. Because arts are real as fuck, dude, and you can't wrap your hands around them, but you know they're real. Sound is real, but we accept it because we're so used to it. The idea that this invisible thing can transmit music and harmony and beautiful feelings and make you fucking pump up when you hear your car singing it. What the fuck is that? This invisible shit. And invisible shit even that's coming from fucking satellites down to us. We want to think that we've got the whole world figured out. We want to think that we know what's real and what's here, and that all that we can sense is all that is there. And I say, fuck that. I say that's ridiculous. I'm saying if you look at some shit that your own brain produces, and this shit that your own brain produces profound visions and incredible experiences, I gotta think that shit is the alien. That's what it is. It's not dudes in metal crafts that are coming from outer space. It's a fucking vine that you mix with a leaf and you boil it over this fire in the Amazon for fucking 10 hours, and then you drink the shit and go on a ride with flying serpents that fucking twist around you, and they're all made out of light. You know, when they teach you about the spirit world, your ancestors, and that everyone's around you all the time, always and forever. They just move in and out of different frequencies. That's the alien. It's not some fucking dude with a sticking a thing up your ass. That's all. Everybody's crazy. So all the people you're talking to on your show are fucking crazy. I think you got to show that everyone's misunderstood and everyone's crazy, and they've all had experiences. But what you need to do is get them high on DMT and then go, yes, that's it, that's it. And go, look, man, I'm gonna show you a videotape of what we just did. We just smoked some shit and went on board. You understand what's happening here? It's not here. That's why you're never gonna see them. All that shit flying over London, you're never gonna see it. So that's what I think about aliens. Unfortunately, that kills the whole show. Yeah, exactly. Kills the whole show. So let's keep speculating.
as a kid, read all the books, studied physics in school, and all through my life the reports have turned up in the odd magazine, little television show. You can't help but ignore them. You can't help but not ignore them. Actually, I didn't say that right. You simply can't ignore these reports. They turn up throughout your life. But you can't do much about them. You can't just jump into the issue. Some do. Often they're retired military, became investigators or joined some organization. I did none of that. But I always paid attention to it and knew that it was extremely important. So when I decided that I wanted to just completely take a different direction in life and do something that was important to me, this issue was right there in front of me. And it didn't take long to figure out that that's where I should go. Better late than never, I always say. So I was 49, actually, when I got involved in this.
And so, since you got involved, what has your role been? What is your role now?
Well, that was the key issue. You get involved in something large. What's your niche? Where can you best fit in? It's not obvious. And if you choose the wrong niche, sometimes you will miss the opportunity to engage. I went to work, a volunteer for John Mack, who was a researcher, a Harvard psychiatrist working out of Cambridge Hospital, and he had formed a group called the Program for Extraordinary Experience Research here. I went to work there, and it got me into the field. I was very excited. Wasn't a particularly good fit, though, for my background, my temperament. But while I was there, and sort of immersed in the issue for 4 months, is when I figured out what my niche was. And that was to engage the politics of the issue, the politics of UFOs, which means the resolution of the issue, which had not been done. Really, no one had formally done that. There had been some efforts to get some hearings, and the odd politician touched it briefly over the years, but there'd been no real formal effort to build a political engagement of the issue. So there it was, just waiting. So I said, fine, I'll take it, I'll do it. And I launched into the politics of UFOs by creating the Paradigm Research Group as a registered lobbyist for a number of groups, hence the name Paradigm Research Group, even though it's not a research organization.
So the work that you do is actually pressuring Congress and state leaders?
I would prefer to say advocating for the resolution of the issue, by all means. Prefer not to pressure anybody if you didn't have to, but it comes down to that oftentimes. But I'm an advocate for a resolution of the UFO ET question in our society, and that resolution is fairly straightforward. The presence of extraterrestrials has been proven beyond any reasonable doubt, regardless of what the government said or not said, by a whole lot of dedicated civilian researchers and amateur researchers and investigators for decades. They've amassed huge amounts of evidence, along with the witness testimonies that have emerged as well. So we know that. We know that the government has withheld what it knows and withheld formal acknowledgement of the issue as part of what I would call a policy of truth embargo. It's not written down anywhere. It couldn't, because that would, of course, be counterintuitive. But we know that, and so we have a bit of a dilemma. The people have pretty much proven the truth of the matter. The government denies the truth exists. It happens a lot over the centuries. We've seen it before. So the resolution is simple. The government has to yield. They have to finally say, yes, they're here, and that's the resolution of the first phase of this issue, the acknowledgement. Then, of course, comes the post disclosure world, where we're going to have to address a whole host of questions which are pretty important, but we'll be able to do so because the government is stepped out of the way.
So when would you like disclosure? I mean, are you pressuring for time as soon as possible? When should they disclose? When is the optimum moment for this?
Well, the first time it could have happened at all under the policy that I think that was in place was 91. The chances of it being formalized, barring something dramatic happening prior to the end of the Cold War, are very small. So the window, and the reason is simple. Well-meaning people inside military intelligence community felt that this kind of dramatic change in understanding and knowledge with all its implications happening while you've got these two powers pointing thousands of nuclear weapons at each other, it's just not a good idea. It's hard to argue with them. I mean, you could make a case that we might have even avoided a lot of it if we had disclosed many years ago, but it's not a slam dunk. So the window opens in 91, and after that it's a matter of just when. But it's inevitable at that point. I would have thought it might have happened sooner, but if you look at the historical record from 91 forward, you can kind of see why it got pushed back. But in that 18 years since the end of the Cold War, the world, as we now are well aware, rather than, and this seems to be a pattern, learning from the previous war, whether it's World War I, World War II, and trying to get things right so that we can have a relatively sane, sustainable world where people have a chance for a reasonably good life. Everyone has a chance. We ended up making the same mistakes again and pursuing the same failed policies again, thus creating the basis for the next conflagration. The people are now starting to sense that something dramatic is to happen, or we're going to end up with a major series of events in the 21st century that'll be as bad as anything we've seen before. The peace dividend didn't materialize. Movement, the nuclear weapons were not dismantled or discarded. They're still there. Could be retargeted easily. The assault on the environment didn't stop in any meaningful way. The population did not. There was no efforts to find a reasonable basis for limiting population, even eventually reducing it. That didn't happen. And a whole host of human condition issues were not resolved or approached. As a result, there's a lot of fertile ground in the world for huge dissatisfaction, which invariably translates into terrorism. So we have an even more, in a sense, volatile and uncertain world than perhaps maybe we even had under the Cold War. So people are pretty kind of irritated by that. And they're looking for answers. We can still have another major war. A few nukes get tossed into some situation and it would spread very quickly. It would be tough to contain it. We also have the potential for nuclear terrorism in the United States, which could generate all kinds of political fallout. So we've really got a very shaky situation now. And this is the irony. The Cold War, because of the simplicity of that dichotomy and the vast power of those weapons, sort of created a kind of stable arena. It was pretty obvious who the enemy was and what would happen if we went to war. And so there were certain rules. You don't do that, you don't do this. And if you're going to have a war, it has to be a proxy war held on somebody else's soil, things like that. And there was kind of an order to it, but yet it was precariously dangerous. And under that situation, there was no likelihood that the acknowledgement of the ET presence would come out, because it might have, quote, unbalanced that rather odd, but nevertheless somewhat effective support situation. Now we're in a way, a more volatile, almost chaotic reality, but of a different type. The potential for bad things happening, very great, but that dramatic, draconian nuclear war thing, not so obvious, not so likely, at least. And so now it's kind of the reverse. The introduction of ET reality, the acknowledgement of this presence, might serve to mitigate this chaos, right? And just the opposite effect of the concern that was held toward the issue before 91. And that's I find that amusing in a way. We need something to focus our attention. We need something to distract us from our old paradigm thinking, our old grudges and blood feuds, which are all ultimately ridiculously trivial in the light of the larger universe. And this would do the job. And it might allow us to then reassess and perhaps pair out the disruptive factors and variables in the world cultures and start moving towards the same global reality here. I mean, so we can't have it soon enough, as far as I'm concerned. It needs to happen tomorrow.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
I believe in an America where the separation of church and state is absolute, where no Catholic prelate would tell the president, should he be Catholic, how to act, and no Protestant minister would tell his parishioners for whom to vote, where no church or church school is granted any public funds or political preference, and where no man is denied public office merely because his religion differs from the president who might appoint him or the people who might elect him.
I have therefore chosen this time and place to discuss a topic on which ignorance too often abounds and the truth too rarely perceived, and that is the most important topic on earth, peace. What kind of a peace do I mean, and what kind of a peace do we seek? Not a Pax Americana enforced on the world by American weapons of war, not the peace of the grave or the security of the slave. I am talking about genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living, the kind that enables men and nations to grow and to hope and build a better life for their children. Not merely peace for Americans, but peace for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, but peace in all time.
We are confronted primarily with a moral issue. It is as old as the Scriptures and is as clear as the American Constitution. The heart of the question is whether all Americans are to be afforded equal rights and equal opportunities, whether we are going to treat our fellow Americans as we want to be treated. If an American, because his skin is dark, cannot eat lunch in a restaurant open to the public, if he cannot send his children to the best public school available, if he cannot vote for the public officials who represent him, if, in short, he cannot enjoy the full and free life which all of us want, then who among us would be content to have the color of his skin changed and stand in his place? Who among us would then be content with the counsels of patience and delay? 100 years of delay have passed since President Lincoln freed the slave, yet their heirs, their grandsons, are not fully free. They are not yet freed from the bond of injustice. They are not yet freed from social and economic oppression. And this nation, for all its hopes and all its boasts, will not be fully free until all its citizens are free.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control.
Me this opportunity to speak, and thank you, Steve, for the invitation. My name, as I said, was Paul Hellyer. I'm a former Minister of National Defence for Canada. I served in 3 governments during a total 23 and a half years as a Member of Parliament. Although as Minister of National Defence, I had sighting reports of UFOs. I was too busy to be concerned about them at the time because I was trying to unify the Army, Navy and Air Force into a single Canadian Defence Force. And that itself was a kind of battle to the finish. So this was not high on my agenda. But about 10 years ago, I started getting interested due to a young man from Ottawa sending me material on the subject. I told him I was too busy to read it, but he had confidence that someday I would. He sent me a copy of Colonel Corso's book, The Day After Roswell. It took me a while to get around to reading it, but I took it for my summer reading in 2005 and was really impressed with what was contained in it. And what I thought to myself is there are huge issues here, huge issues. And the American people and the people of the world have a right to know what's going on because they're part of it. It's not just an isolated thing. And so after confirming the contents of the book with a retired United States Air Force general, I accepted the invitation of Victor Gianni, who's over here somewhere, and his cohort Mike Bird to speak to a symposium at the University of Toronto. And I said, UFOs are as real as the airplanes flying overhead. That gave me the dubious distinction of being the first person of cabinet rank in the G8 group of countries to say so unequivocally. Since then, I've learned a lot from many sources, including a number of the fantastic witnesses that we have heard these last 4 days. So they were so outstanding, I was just really blown away with them, the amount of information that was available. And I appreciate every single one of them. But because I'm not a ufologist, I'm a politician, there are only a few things that I want to add in a particular realm. First is that about in the 1960s sometime, there was a flotilla of UFOs headed south that crossed into NATO territory in Europe. And the Commander-in-Chief of the Supreme Allied Headquarters in Europe was naturally very shaken. Fortunately, or maybe divine providence, before the panic button was pushed, the flotilla turned around and headed back north. Obviously, they had thought maybe they were Russian and they were very concerned about it. Anyway, an investigation was launched into this whole subject, and a document was prepared which concluded that at least 4 species had been visiting Earth for thousands of years. And this is my own view at this stage as well. So, except for that, there are just a couple of things that we've talked about that I'd like to refer to. And one was that we were referring to them as they until this morning when Linda Moulton Howe, I think she was the first one, actually named 3 different species. I have brought my latest book called Light at the End of the Tunnel, A Survival Plan for the Human Species, as an aide-memoir, and I name 5 different species here. I'm aware of more now. As a matter of fact, I saw a document just a few days ago that mentioned 20. And I think you, Mr. Chairman, were interested in some of the places they might come from. And I have in here Zeta Reticuli, R-T-I-C-U-L-I, Reticuli, the Pleiades, Orion, Andromeda, and the Altair star systems. So I don't think we can any more refer to them as they, because they're not an amorphous mass. They are different species and consequently may have different agendas. I don't think we can say that they all have the same agenda any more than we could say that the United States, China, and Russia had the same agenda. Our real interests may be very similar, but as of now, our perceived interests are still quite far apart. One more observation before I begin what I want to say, and that is that we spent quite a bit of time talking about the 66-year-old cadavers, and I was glad to have Linda this morning finally say that there are live ETs on Earth at this present time, and at least 2 of them probably working with the United States government. The other species that I learned about not too long ago was called the tall whites. And this is when Paula Harris broke the story just a few years ago. And through her good offices, I had the chance to talk for about 3 hours with former Airman Charles Hall and listen to this absolutely fascinating story of how he was working with, first of all, he was scared out of his skin, but after that, when he got to know them, how he was working with, and finally they became to trust each other and have a good working relationship with the tall whites at the gun range at Indian Springs in Nevada. And these tall whites were living on United States Air Force property and working in cooperation with the United States Air Force and sharing technology with them. He wrote a book, incidentally, called Millennial Hospitality. There are 4 different versions, but Paula says that Millennial Hospitality number 2 is the best. I think that's the one I read, and it's a very interesting read if you want to sort of get inside the problem of what it's like to bump into the people floating across the terrain in the desert. Well, enough on that for now. My interest is in full disclosure. And my only caveat is I think probably I would say 95 to 98% full disclosure. I know of 1 or 2 things that I'm not sure should be in the public domain, at least yet. They will be someday, I'm sure, but not maybe immediately. But just as children survive the idea of the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus when they become adult, I think that tax-paying citizens are quite capable of accepting the new and broader reality that we live in a cosmos teeming with life of various sorts. The fact that some other civilizations are more advanced than we are may be humbling, but that could be a necessary step in our survival. The world is an unholy mess. We have it best until the end of this decade. In my book, I said we have 10 years to stop global warming if we don't want it to be beyond the point of no return. 2 years has gone past since it was written, so I say we have until the end of the decade to arrest global warming. Yet our leaders don't even talk about it very much, except in a superficial way. They appear to be more interested in starting wars to control more oil and, in effect, prolong the gravity of the threat. Of course, even if they took the problem seriously, they wouldn't have the finances to finance the transition from oil to the clean economy, to clean energy, because we have an infinitely silly banking and financial system in the Western world. And the United States Congress, I regret to say, is partly responsible, and I'd be glad to elaborate on that later if you're interested. And finally, they need the technology for clean energy. And it exists, and it's being kept secret by the same vested interests who control our destiny. Who are these vested interests, and what are they up to? Well, Senator, you were talking about a military junta. In my opinion, that is true, but I have broadened and deepened the definition to cabal, and the cabal comprises members of the 3 sisters: the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderbergers, and the Trilateral Commission, the International Banking Cartel, the Oil Cartel, members of various intelligence organizations, and select members of the military junta, who together have become a shadow government of not only the United States, but of much of the Western world. The Council on Foreign Relations is the oldest of the three sisters, and as early as October 1940, years before Germany surrendered to the Allied armies and to vaporize Hitler's vision of empire, the Council's Economic and Financial Group drafted a memorandum outlining a comprehensive policy, quote, to set forth the political, military, territorial, and economic requirements of the United States in its political potential leadership of the non-German world, including the United Kingdom itself, as well as the Western Hemisphere and the Far East. The Council made absolutely no effort to disguise, where's that? Right next page, yeah. The Council made no effort to disguise the fact that the purpose of the Grand Area and later world hegemony was to support an expanding U.S. economy, to provide it with raw materials and markets for its products. This was labeled the national interest, quote unquote. It was equally clear that the national interest was the interest of the ruling elite, whose members comprised the Council. The real interests of the majority of rank-and-file Americans was never a factor in the equation. So, Mr. David Rockefeller was a member of all three of the sisters, is quoted as saying this at a meeting of the Bilderbergers in Europe. We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other great publications, whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subjected to the lights of publicity during those years. But the world is more sophisticated and prepared to march toward world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in past centuries. He, of course, pretended he didn't say that, but the witness is reported by Daniel Estulin, a thoroughly reliable reporter who has written the true story of the Bilderberger Group. And if you want to really get inside of what's been going on there for this long time, that's a good place to go. So anyway, you hear what Mr. Rockefeller said, and so there you have it. The aim of the game is a world government comprising members of the cabal who are elected by no one and accountable to no one. And according to Mr. Rockefeller, the plan is well advanced. Does this help you to understand why our civil rights are being taken away from us? I say us, because Canada too is included in the grand plan. A giant leap in the wrong direction followed the end of the Cold War. No one could have been happier than I was when the Berlin Wall came down on November the 9th, 1989. The elation on our side of the curtain was near universal, and very significant on the other side as one country after another regained its freedom. Nearly everyone believed that it was the dawn of a new era of peace and prosperity for people everywhere. there was much talk of a peace dividend. The prospects were dazzling in their scope and diversity. It was a unique and God-given opportunity for a new, braver, and fairer world. We blew it. We blew the chance of a lifetime to do good things. A small group of zealots undermined our golden opportunity to pursue peace, not war, and little did we dream that they had a vastly different vision of the new world order. Their plan, which is now commonly known as the Project for a New American Century, included preventive wars in clear violation of international law, regime change wherever and whenever the U.S. desires, and if they can get away with it without excessive casualties, and the establishment of a kind of economic and cultural hegemony with America acting as constabulary, quote unquote. That was their word, globally. This to be accomplished without authority of the United Nations and without the restraint of existing international treaties. It would involve a military build-up unprecedented in peacetime history and could trigger an arms race, which is precisely the opposite of the peace dividend that the world had rightly looked forward to. The Machiavellian scheme involved secret police, the curtailment of civil liberties in defiance of the U.S. Constitution, and a moribund economy operating way below its potential. Exactly those features for which the Soviet Union was held in contempt. The initial draft of the document was so controversial when it was leaked to the New York Times that it had to be rewritten, but it was not changed very much, just the cosmetics, enough to make it politically acceptable. So, here to my bearings. The document said this: well, it may have been easy to persuade President Bush to abandon his stated policy of not getting America more deeply involved in international affairs, but persuading the American people would be more difficult. Sophisticated Americans would question such a giant sea change in policy. The authors of Rebuilding America's Defenses, Strategy, Forces, and Resources for a New Century recognized this difficulty from the outset, because their document contained the following sentence: further, I'm quoting, further, the process of transformation, even if it brings revolutionary changes, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor. Well, it wasn't too long before they got their catastrophic and catalyzing event. Terrorists struck the World Trade Center in New York and the Pentagon in Washington on September the 11th.
Here, the Disclosure Project, which I founded some years ago, it was first Project Starlight when I began work with Lawrence Rockefeller. We now have over 500. Many of them, I have the names of them and they can be subpoenaed. Some of them, about 100 of them, we have on digital videotape. Why is this a story? And I think that this becomes a very important question in a democracy. You know, if you have the larger media not covering something that 50–60% of the public believe is true, and there's an enormous amount of data, 4,000 landing cases, the Cometa report where they documented the landing Provence of a craft, the Bentwaters case where a craft landed at RAF Bentwaters and left physical trace that had been confirmed by the Ministry of Defense. We have all this hard data and information. We have radar traces of these objects moving. We have pilot cases. We have over 3,500 pilot reports in our archives. This isn't a story. How can that be? Now, there's another reason, the ha-ha factor. I have met with so many senior people in government who say, I am so interested in this, but don't let anyone know that I'm interested. And the reason for it, I think, you could be gay and have 5 wives and do whatever. I mean, you could do anything and be out of the closet on it, and it would be no problem. But this subject, whoa, watch out, because your career is on the line, as mine was. Okay. Now, I think that what you find is that the social opprobrium, that's an appropriate term, attached to this issue was launched in 1953. We have a CIA document that describes their attempts to debunk and ridicule the subject, but also, very important, to engage Disney Studios to make cartoons and movies about it that would marginalize the subject. This is a CIA document, little green men, ha, 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 ha. So that has worked, and there's an Air Force major, George Filer, who I know, he may be here, who said, look, the secrecy really has been created mainly through the force of just ridicule. People don't want to be made a laughing stock. And I think that fear of ridicule by one's peerage, whether you're a senator or a doctor or a university professor, is a very hard thing to overcome once the counterintelligence people have done their business, and they have on this. And it is propaganda. There is very serious information and intelligence, and I think that we have to figure out how do we get around the truth embargo, as Steve calls it. In reality, we're sort of it's not just the government doing the embargo, it's we are doing the embargo because we have been brainwashed to laugh at this issue and to look at it in a very serious, scientific, in-depth, and honest and truthful way.